violins of autumn wound my heart with a monotonous languor.
Мною принято решение о проведении специальной военной операции.
Today at 1, we're live in Ukraine as Russia invades in a major military assault by land, sea and air.
It's now more than a month since the US Speaker, Nancy Pelosi, visited Taiwan. China's ambassador to Australia also issued a blunt warning a few days ago that those who push for Taiwanese independence will be punished.
We're waiting for a peaceful reunification, but we cannot rule out other options.
You won't have to do it anymore. 4 more years, you know what? It'll be fixed, it'll be fine. You won't have to vote anymore.
Welcome to Dictators v Democrats, Why We Fight, the show where we speak to those on the front lines of defending democracy around the world. New episodes drop every Friday, and if you enjoy this program, then I do have one favor to ask of you. If you can think of just one other person who you think may enjoy it as well, may find value in it, a friend, colleague, or family member, then share it with them and tell them why you like it. With your help, we can help get these vital stories out to more and more people. Also, don't forget to check out the rest of my work on the Dictators v Democrats YouTube and Substack channels. If you want to support my work, then paid subscribers to Substack and Patreon get access to Why We Fight 1 week early. With all of that said, let's find out why they fight. Welcome to Why We Fight. Today I'm joined by Jaden Braves, a Canadian democracy activist and political organiser and a director at the Sephira Institute. He's the founder of the Young Politicians of Canada and has already operated in spaces that most people twice his age haven't, or at least certainly would put some thought into going before they did. Jaden represents a new generation trying to rethink how democracy functions and how it works and how it can best serve everybody. So today we're going to get into who he is, what he believes, and ultimately what he thinks is really worth fighting for. Jaden, thank you very much for joining us.
It's wonderful to be here. Thank you for having me.
So I want to start, as we always do, with yourself. Before everything, before you've started on this journey, and you are remarkably young to be doing everything that you're doing, which is a horribly aging thing for me to say. But what made you first care about democracy?
Well, ageism is an interesting thing, isn't it? When a system imposes some sort of fundamental belief that you are lesser because of the amount of years that you spent, even though you are largely a stakeholder and the individual that has to bear the consequences of the decisions that get made in politics, in government, in security, in all of these issues that my generation will have to inherit and face. Democracy and the involvement in democracy for me is the idea that the demos, the people, have Cressy power, and that's fairly unanimous apparently in Canada until I started to understand the problems within our system, where electoral reform hasn't happened. So first past the post, an electoral system where you need lots and lots more votes to elect somebody that gets 100% of the power and neglects the other opponents that get much less of the power, even though they got voted in by their constituents, was a system to which we practiced. And that was incredibly frustrating to me and continues to be as a young person who feels that their vote, when they do get to start voting, is going to be neglected. So I think if we look at the root of it from a psychological standpoint, maybe I was just a defiant kid when I was 11 years old and I went to a Green Party meeting around the corner from my house. But I suppose the Green Party was so not particularly developed and a little bit left in the behind because it's the Green Party and they have a problem with organizing themselves, that I ended up being a federal councillor and the youngest federal councillor in Canada for the electoral board when I was 15. So the things and the places that we find ourselves in. And it was not long after that I realized the ones operating our democracy and facilitating these structures, these hugely important democratic and institutional structures that control from the concept of an idea to, as you were discussing, the implementation of laws on the street by a police officer, are run by a lot of these old white men in their 60s that knew what they were talking about perhaps 40 years ago or 30 years ago, but now have no sense of what it's like to grow up in an age of technology, in an age where issues like online harms and artificial intelligence exist, an issue that I've also done a lot of advocacy on, and had several delegations be working on, in addition to the technical nuance of defense and security. And I think so much that is missing from the repertoire of a lot of those who legislate our countries. So that's what motivates me, and dare I say, lights a fire under my ass every day to be showing up and to be making sure that democratic systems are who they're intended for.
You mentioned you got elected when you were 15. That's that's impressive. How did you find yourself in that position, especially so young? How do you get into the room where it happens?
I think people really underestimate the beauty of showing up. I think I gave this anecdote. I was on a panel 2 nights ago with former ambassador of Canada and the UN, Bob Ray. And he says a couple things that I think are important to share, and then I'll make my comment. But minding the gap between, in the British to mind the gap between, and how they go. We're not that British here in Canada. We just let people fall through the cracks. But nevertheless, not that many people here. My comment is that people have to mind the gap between themselves and those below themselves and those above them. People that are in positions of authority via hereditary power or via wealth or property have to mind the gap between men and women, have to mind the gap between the poor and the rich, and have to have that consideration regardless of where they're coming from. And if you're one, or the question is how I got into that position, I think I was probably minding the gap between an 11-year-old kid and a position of power that I thought I was entitled to, given maybe not power, but a position of a voice of input that I was entitled to, given I was a constituent within my local electoral district. As are you somewhere, as are anyone listening, they are constituents within their electoral districts. And so I took that action to show up to a meeting. And I think, again, 100% of people RSVP to an event, 50% of them show up. And showing up is really what gets you somewhere further than you were. And I met a bunch of these people, and I realized these are the people that are taking orders from a central party, and they're getting told what to do by a headquarters of a party, and getting told what to do by the electoral commission of the Canadian electoral rules, but they don't have actually diverse or representative voices going into the back end of who's on that structure. The party's federal council was made up of older people that were not particularly representative nor had particularly diverse opinions, and one leader who made a lot of the decisions. The federal side on the electoral commission was made up of a couple of people that were almost all public servants, and that had the role of implementing laws that were pushed forward from the public service side. And so to me, it just seemed like, why can't I be here? That seems like a perfectly reasonable outlet to participate in. And over time, I was going to these meetings, I was participating in this, I realized there was vacancies, and you had to be 12 to get a part of something like this, and on a board, join a party, and I ran for federal council, and I was elected. And I was then sitting on federal council in this role, finding myself mediating conversations between adults that didn't know how to regulate themselves, nor knew how to carry out the laws that they wanted, the bylaws that they wanted to pass, or the actions that they wanted to take. And so it was incredibly frustrating. It is, democracy is frustrating, and working with a system that's out of date is also frustrating.
Yeah, it reminds me of an anecdote from my interview with Ben Hodges. He describes democracy as not at all being ballet, it's rugby football. It's messy. It's difficult.
It's true.
Did you have any preconceptions upon being elected? And did you learn anything about how that system works that perhaps dismiss those notions?
Well, I think when you're in a position of any sort of election, you're in a fiduciary role. You're in the role as I think you have the same role as a police officer, which is you're in the interest of what you're serving, and you're not allowed to have personal interest. Like you're taking an oath upon being elected that your personal interest and desires are not represented in the actions that you take. And some people, I think, do a better job of this than others in their elected positions, as we all know. But what I think was frustrating was seeing how slow processes went because they've been acceptable to move at that rate and have been accepted to move at that rate. So when you see the complexities and the red tape behind why decisions take a long time, why parliament takes a long time, when I went out to advocate for various issues, and you see a huge myriad of perspectives that are behind the rationale of why things take a long time, and controversy and political back and forth. Some of it makes sense, some of it's reasonable, most of it's not, and it's absolute garbage. And that's why there needs to be reforms, and that's why there needs to be younger people sitting in the House. The other frustration I have is that many young people do not understand the values of Western liberal democracy, and you have to create a generation that can carry forth the legacy of what you bring, what exactly your system offers. I'm thinking of like Machiavelli and like the princedoms, where you would take over a princedom and you have to keep the same laws and the same regulations, but you have to make sure that when you change the authority, there's the same base of who is there's the same application of the law to everyone that's a part of it. Everybody needs to see that there is a system that we actually follow, that we trust. And if that was changed and we had the same laws applied to us, it wouldn't be the same thing. It wouldn't be the same fundamental system. We have a system. We have to know what that means. We have to know how that's applied. And that's just totally lost, I think, amongst students, not only in the UK, in Canada, and the US. I was just in the US and hearing from people saying, is your president red or blue? And like, oh, Mark Carney, I guess he's red. That's the logo of the Liberal Party of Canada. Yeah. In our,
Oh, I wonder if you may be touching on a particularly American problem there regards exceptionalism. But I definitely want to circle back to young people, because it's a question I ask all of my interviewees, and it's going to be particularly relevant here. But you mentioned reforms. And from your perspective, I want to know where, in particular, democracy, liberal democracy of the type that we both share, is in need of reform.
Well, first, I think we have to define what democracy means. Is it the fact that people have power and they have the role to elect a federal or provincial or municipal representative? It's not constitutionally true in the UK that in Canada, they don't have a constitution in the UK, I don't think. Do you?
It's a real bugbear of mine, and I can't help myself. So yes, we have a constitution. It's uncodified. So the constitution in the United Kingdom comes from a variety of different sources. Common law, statute law, international treaties, and up to and including works of note. So Hobbes's Leviathan, for example, could be counted as part of the British Constitution.
Can you challenge it and take it to what we would call a Supreme Court here in Canada?
Well, we have a Supreme Court, and you can challenge aspects, legislation that's due to be passed, etc. However,
but not the Constitution itself.
Well, you couldn't necessarily find an article under which to challenge it. However, if there's previous legislation, say for example, there's been a lot of there were challenges to the previous government's plan to deport illegal migrants to Rwanda. And the base of that challenge was the Human Rights Act and the international treaties we have signed, because Parliament had not withdrawn from them, so they still applied.
Right. the lack of codification is so common law. You're making a really strong case. While in Canada and the U.S., you have a constitution that you can challenge, and if you can justify as to how you're correct or the constitution is incorrect in terms of the application of the law in terms of your case or whatever it is that you're being challenged with is incorrect in terms of the constitution, you can win the case. And the discrepancy is that we don't just have the ability to challenge legislation in our country. We also have a rule book that was only created in 1982, thanks to the independence of the British colony and the final development of Canada's independent system. The point that I'm making is that there's no constitutional line that says we're allowed to vote municipally. There is one that says we're allowed to vote provincially and federally, but there also isn't one that says you have to be 18 to vote. So how do you create democratic participation, both from a participatory standpoint, but also from a engagement and interest in voting standpoint at the provincial and federal level? A couple things. A, lower the voting age to 16. I think that this is amazingly controversial amongst people that I speak to for some reason, and I agree it's maybe a non-issue right now. But if you want young people to show up to vote, look at the statistics. You've got over a 90% voter turnout rate in Austria because they made it legal for 16-year-olds to vote. You've got much increased in Scotland, where they've tested it, where they've done studies on neurological research and how there isn't really a difference. And we also know that 80% of voters around the world vote the same way as their parents. So, if we know that voting is hereditary based on the values that you probably brought up with, and we know that there's not really discrepancy between an 18-year-old's voter ability and a 16-year-old's voter ability, we also let 16-year-olds get behind the wheel of a car. Why not let them elect the one that's going to represent them and their constituents? They are mostly paying tax. A lot of them do have part-time jobs, and a lot of them are subject to the, realities of a public system. All of them. And so that, I think, is the number one way you can bring literal democracy into the classroom at an age where people aren't distracted by other things going on, university, jobs, work, travel, whatever they're doing in their lives, fighting their own battles of being an adult. Let democracy come to them at a time where they realize they have the autonomy and power to have a voice and a presence within a system that otherwise wouldn't allow them to, or they wouldn't realize they would be allowed to. And then the second is to actually create a vote reform system that allows them to be involved. And we don't have enough citizens' assemblies in this country. A citizen assembly is the idea of creating larger groups of dialogue and of consultation around any sort of legislative pass. We don't have many referenda, I think, plural for referendum, referendums. Dare I say? Somebody's gonna put it in the comments. Please comment the correct.
Please
plural.
comment the correct. I'm not sure, is it Latin or Greek? Root?
Anyway. I hope it's referenda. I've used that term on numerous interviews where lots of people were watching. So now I feel very stupid if it's not. Anyway, so there's this problem. There's this lacunae in youth participation because there isn't a pull factor to bring younger people to the forefront. And so, like, a great example, if you were to legislate the internet, if you were to legislate deepfakes and artificial intelligence and online regulation, who's your number one stakeholder? It's not 40-year-olds, it's not 30-year-olds, it's literal, it's people starting probably between the age of like 9 to mid-20s. Like, those are the ones using the internet, those are the ones using social media. When I say the internet, I mean people that are subject to potential online harms. So we're thinking Instagram, Snapchat, TikTok, Twitter. You're getting misinformation, you're getting disinformation, you're getting foreign interference, trying to basically control your perception to make you inclined to vote in a particular way or to act in a particular way. Radicalization that ends up on university campuses. These are the stakeholders. But when it was being tabled as a Bill C-63 last year under Trudeau in Canada, it was kept behind closed doors of the commission of the Ministry of Heritage, Canadian Heritage. Explain to me how those things go together, and under the Ministry of Justice with the Justice Minister. Okay, fair enough. So you have these two ministries collaborating, kind of creating this bill and trying to figure out what to do with it. And they make this bill, and it goes to first reading, and it passes first reading, and then it goes into the tabling, the committee, it goes to committee stage where it's being debated in committee, and it becomes a confidential session where they're having closed door conversations without any public inclusion on the topic that is so integral to 5 million young people across our country and is not including any of them in the discussion. And so, me being a defiant teenager, I organized a group of young Canadians, and we went to meet with the Prime Minister and the House leaders of each party to get them to maybe hear from some young people from what they actually find as values. So we brought young people from coast to coast to coast of this country, and had a gathering in Parliament Hill. I was, if I wasn't there to organize it as just a public citizen who's showing up and advocating, there would be no infrastructure to be making that room for inclusion. So there's no room within government, within legislation. There aren't even opportunities for young people to fall in love with the system of democracy, with the process of having their voice heard within a system, because there isn't fundamentally systems to which create that inclusion. And it falls on my plate somehow to end up being the one to pursue that. Because I don't know who else would have.
It's actually a very common answer that I get when asking questions like that is, if not me, then who? And I really enjoy that. And I think it's fantastic that people like yourself and like many others I've had the privilege to speak to decide to put their head over the parapet. But I wanted to sort of dig further into reform. So you mentioned lowering the voting age and electoral reform. Is there anything more granular, perhaps? I mean, changing from first past the vote, but first past the vote to alternative votes. I mean, we had a referendum on this
ballots
in 2011, I think it was.
Yeah. I mean, ranked ballots is another option. For example, allowing. Oh, and I already pushed for this with municipal, and I got it passed in Toronto, which was to allow 16-year-olds to participate in municipal polling, where you bring more young inclusion into lower stake elections that are more community based, for example. But I think you're so right in saying, if not me, then who? Like that is the question that I ask myself. That's the question that everyone listening that thinks about their own role within democracy or participatory democracy has to ask themselves, because it's not, when are you going to ask your politician or your advocate to do something for you? In the great words of Kennedy, is it? Ask not what you can do for what the United States can do for you, but what you can do for the United States, what you can do for democracy. Yes, that's what it is. Ask not what democracy can do for you, but what you can do for democracy.
And so, your country.
What
your country.
But let's apply it to democracy.
Yes.
And ask not what democracy can do for you, or what those that are already serving it allegedly can do for you, but how you play a role. Like, every contact of a member of parliament is public in Canada and in the UK. If you have something to say, you can reach them. In Canada, you have phone numbers, and you can call your member of parliament, and you can call a staff member, and you can advocate. You can organize. You can create town halls. You can use public institutions that are funded by you to go out and create any sort of group of advocacy or of a presence of participatory democratic engagement. What is participatory democracy? You can't always vote, but you can often gather, and you can often arrange, and you can share ideas, and you can share opinion, and you can share dialogue and debate, and then take out those ideas and bring them to the forefront of the legislative process in order to benefit the greater of society. And so, that case has to be made often by the public, because there's fundamentally not enough infrastructure within the government in order to do that consistently enough to benefit all constituents, which means often, far often than not, I think most of the time, if you're a constituent, you have to go out and make the case for yourself, and you have to be that leader. You have to be, if not me, then who? You have to be that me. No one else is going to do it. And so, coming back to some of the greater reforms, my opinion is just my opinion, and it's not, it's not indefinite. And the only way that if I wanted to make my opinion relevant would be to gather with other people that share it, but to actually fully understand why do I believe that these are issues that actually need to be grounded by something. It's like people in Canada have claimed that legislating the internet is goes against freedom of expression, which is silly because if you look at the Oakes test in law and you balance benefit to society versus benefit for the individual, benefit to society totally outweighs benefit to the individual because it is fundamentally affecting every young person around the world right now, harm on social media. And so we need legislation on that. And like, I think I'm trying to cultivate as many young people that can come together and believe and share that frame of mind as I am to pursue that in legislation. We still don't even have a new bill tabled since Parliament was prorogued by the last federal government.
Proroguing of Parliament. Yeah, hot button issue here as well, as was at least under Johnson.
Right.
I want to zoom out from democracy itself and democracy in Canada, participatory democracy, to defense. And this is something, an area which you have had some focus on with the NATO Association of Canada, etc. Do you think democracy is at war at the moment?
Do I think democracy is up there?
At war.
Is at war. Is democracy at war? Oh gosh, don't make me use these silly terms. Is democracy at war? Is the fundamentals and principles of the things that we have fought for hundreds of years now being thrown out the window by Donald Trump? Yes, but like, what does that mean practically speaking? Is democracy at war? Do we have okay, let's break down these terms. Russia exists, so does China. Strategic relationships are being built now with China and BRICS nations in the West. And also more collaboration is happening with Russia in the past 2 weeks, thanks to Iran, and more so thanks to Netanyahu and Trump invoking this Iran conflict, then that will therefore have dividends. For example, my gas costing $2 a liter, which is astonishing to me. But for example, there are a number of consequences that come along with this. Are we causing the democracy to be at war ourselves by world leaders not taking the rule of law and the principles that we all have agreed to follow seriously? Mayhaps. Is Trump a major conduit to the potential rationale and reason behind this war of democracy that's going on around the world? I would also say so. Is social media as a tool and platform to radicalize and let's say create momentum around interest groups and opinions of youth around the world being manipulated by foreign interests to pursue ideology that is antithetical to the principles of their country, also happening all over the world? Also, yes. So I think we've got a little bit of a mixed message happening where you have Russian propaganda where I'll go talk to Canadians and Americans and they'll share with me that they think Ukraine is the bad guy because of how good Russia is at making their voice, heard. And I can talk more about my witnessing of that, but I will say that is happening, and you will have a surprising amount of conversations with people that are not siding with, Western democracy in this war, which is truly what it is. I mean, the reason that Europe is behind Ukraine, for anyone that doesn't have this through their head yet, it's not because everyone loves Ukraine. It's because everyone loves the fact that we have a border of democracy that we don't want pushed any further west than it has to be, that we don't want pushed any further east, shrunk than it has to be, because that is fundamentally the border of where people have the ability to speak, to elect, to express, to practice what they would like, what they want as people, as free citizens within a democracy. And beyond that, there isn't. And that's the simplest term really to go about it. And so when you start to have shared, balance of dialogue, and my camera will do that and come back in a moment. Thank you, Apple Computer. When you happen to have a balance of dialogue behind people that are from, multiple countries, some of whom are from BRICS nations, some of whom are from different, ideological backgrounds, you have to fundamentally go back to the government that is acting for the people that they're representing and look at what the decisions they're taking are and how you how do you recreate? I'm trying to figure out how to say this, because I think the question is, how do you recreate principles of Western democracy in a time where there are so many different means of information that can hit citizens at once and influence the way that they are going to perceive world issues. And therefore, you do have a war on democracy, because you have a war on values that infiltrates the citizens to which are a part of the democracy that they're participating in. And even talking to my peers, many of whom are still in high school, and hearing the fact that they have, just such a wide variety of opinions that are grounded in reels and TikToks that they've seen put out by perhaps, foreign interest. That is a reflection of how ungrounded we are in democracy and how poor the system has been at evolving to the time that's needed in order to create the stability and trust within institutions that are needed right now. And I think one of the anecdotes there is, I was in Ukraine, and I had met somebody who was about my age, who had had his legs broken and his arms broken, and was left in a jail cell in Russia after being kidnapped for a few months, for a year, uh, and was in basically what they have these re-education camps for Ukrainians, where they're not allowed to wear Ukrainian colors, they're not allowed to speak Ukrainian. There's all these different silly, like there's a little rule book I saw originally from the Russian camp, where they were expressing how they're not allowed to be themselves or anything about themselves, and they're being trained as military soldiers. Like, that's an example of
How old was this person? You said about
16.
your age.
Yeah, he was 16. It was a child. Yeah. As some call, this is a child. He was kidnapped in occupied territories in Kharkiv. He was taken into Russia. He eventually was brought back through a rescue operation, and now he's probably quite traumatized for the rest of his life. But I don't see any other countries doing that, and I think that's why we have a border of Western democracy. That's one of the many reasons why this is such an important fight to fight. And the problem is that that value of what democracy is so conflated, because there are so many different opinions and sources influencing people within countries that are all over Western countries, because we have freedom of expression, that it becomes extremely dangerous to, I think, the values that we may or may not be practicing. Like, it's like, what is the direction? What are the core principles that we can all agree on? And agreed upon fact that we all have is extremely important, and is becoming also less common. So that's kind of, again, it's a very broad mix of ideas. I had to kind of ground myself in how to frame this, I think, because I don't talk a lot about the very macro picture of where democracy stands in the context of the world. And we could also talk about Europe and how that is kind of changing very quickly, and where power stands. But as you mentioned, Mark Carney's speech, it is about middle powers in the world right now. It's about the ability for common values to continue to unite, but also create maybe a more nuanced way of explaining what shared values look like, and how to create that almost unanimous constitution of Western and principled democratic values we all stand by, and that we can all share. And that's something that we put a lot of effort into making sure is the clear message to all citizens of the United Countries.
You uncannily went exactly where I was hoping to take you in the next question, which was quite quite a skill. But I want to focus on, I guess, the hard power stuff. And where do you think we should go with regards to defense? Canada and the other democratic middle powers, United Kingdom, France,
Right.
etc.
I don't like war. I don't like defense. I would rather be in a world where we don't have to have any guns or any ammunition, and you don't have big private companies winning multi-billion-dollar contracts to produce weaponry that's designed to kill people. You had Dr. Roberta Foa on your podcast, who I think would also say that if you speak to enough people, really any people at all, you'll find that we're all extremely similar. He who has been in the survey world for his entire life, working in public opinion and measuring attitude, we will find that the majority of people out there are extremely similar and all have the same greater interest. And the framework of world order and rule of law and what we've kind of invented as principles, again, why it's becoming so conflated in the 21st century, uh, is difficult to justify the war that we create. Does that make sense? I think so. So when we get back to the part of defense that's so important right now, I think from the one hand, arm NATO and create middle powers, create more agreements within middle powers that doesn't include the US or includes the US by option, to have significantly more industrial development and to create more defense infrastructure to protect ourselves against nations that have alternative interests. It's also very funny and strange to me how in Canada the political perspective right now is to pursue lots of defense development, while at the same time we're making strategic partnerships with countries like China and India, and many others. And so it's this clear basically lack of direct communication around a direction and partnership with countries that would very knowingly partner with those that are not aligned with Canadian needs, all to basically respond to the threat of the United States right now being unreliable, being untrustworthy. While that situation may only last a few more years, and we're now maybe making political decisions that are greater than the sum of our values and our boundaries of what we know and what we do as Canadians or as British, which is actually very, very similar to what's happening with the current administration in the UK right now. And so coming back to how do we unite as middle powers, how do we do that and create strong enough and infrastructural defense? Well, you need all of Europe. You need the EU to also include other countries that are beyond the EU. You need other countries. You need Canada. You need the UK. You need to include the US if you can. And NATO has to do a lot more at extending itself to greater Indo-Pacific partners, South Korea, Japan, Turkey is included by now. And I was in Georgia and looking at, how can we arm situations and societies where there isn't maybe a consideration that they are the most trusted or they're the most infrastructurally sound, but to have this shared defense apparatus of power that we all know is going to respond to a key set of values. And those values that we define are again pushed back through the pipeline of democratic channels where we make sure all people, including young people, understand what those values are, that have to have somewhat more nuance than my long sentence of constitutional Western democracy and parliamentary democracy and monarchy and these terms that are just a bunch of words that don't really mean anything to most people unless you break it down and talk about what those values represent. And that's something that needs to shift in order to empower middle powers to take that lead, in order to arm properly, in order to have shared defense and reliability, and in order to have a unanimous population where we don't see protests that are driven by those that don't fundamentally understand what it is they're protesting in the first place.
I want to get on to those people, the people that perhaps don't fundamentally understand. And you mentioned sort of the attitudes of younger people earlier. Are you concerned about the people about others in your generation and the way they seem to be going politically? Because it seems that they are being drawn to further extremes, either on the right or on the left. And that worries me. But I'm a millennial, so I don't have the same perspective.
Millennials have slightly more maybe ground to see the reason and the rationale behind why systems are the way that they are. Gen Zs have little to none because they haven't been maybe subject to certain world events in our time that has justified enough with the right signaling or messaging as to why we make the decisions we make as countries or do the things that we do. What I mean by that if it's not, inherently clear, is that we have a generation that's been signaled from so many different outlets of information. And, I pick up my phone and I can scroll TikTok, Instagram, whatever I'd like, and I will get loads of information from loads of sources that will tell me tons of different things. And then it'll listen and it'll follow what I'm interested in to set up an algorithm to put more of the content that I am apparently interested in front of me to further, and I hate to use the term radicalize, but I will use it, push me or mobilize me in a particular direction of interest, which is happening to a variety of people in a variety of different paths without any grounding in what we actually do. And the public education, which is also really where this starts, is having proper infrastructure within public education to address these issues, is not grounding the values that we represent as countries and are so proud by in the classroom. What does it mean to have a country where you can, go outside and swear at a police officer and that's totally fine and there's nothing that anyone can do about that? What does it mean to have a country where you can criticize your elected officials and, that's a freedom of expression that you have as a human right, that you can also practice whatever religion you'd like and sleep with whoever you'd like and identify with however that is something that we don't share in the same way that I think did in the past, and unite in values. And that, with the layer of so many different streams of information coming at once, creates this discrepancy between millennial, Gen Z, Gen X, and then Boomer and Gen X, who've had significant wars and have had messaging around those wars in their lifetimes, that have created, let's say, a fundamental perspective with only certain streams of information giving them the information that they have to respond to that issue. And there was slightly less of that in millennial, which is why we're also seeing millennials participate in some of the response to what's going on in the world. What I see amongst Gen Zs most significantly is that they don't know what they're protesting. They don't know what they're responding to. And that's like super pejorative of a thing to say, like, oh, people my age don't know what they're talking about. It's not really what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that there's so many different streams of opinion that and information that it seems like it's really hard for people right now to have grounding and levels of opinion that are meaningful to them, that are actually well reinforced, when there's so much of it happening and there isn't really much stability to latch onto. And they think that they're doing the right thing by engaging with what they're engaging in without maybe understanding the base to why they're doing what they're doing.
And it's interesting that you focus very heavily on social media, especially.
Yeah.
Do you think we should be treating it as a critical national infrastructure?
I think we need to be treating it as a national security threat. I mean, look at it like,
how would you approach that? Because social media is something I don't think a single country can effectively legislate it. I mean, we're trying over here with the OSA.
Things that are going to be showing up, then you're breaching freedom of expression. You see the problem. That is fundamentally the issue. Yes.
Sorry, so how? No, it's okay. How can the democracies all together, perhaps EU plus Kanzuk,
sure,
plus Southeast Asia, coming together, what sort of program can we implement to ensure that our social media is A, safe for young people, and B, not a hotbed of rank dis and misinformation?
Oh, it's such a hard question, because you start to limit foreign presence on your internal social media and your domestic social media, and then you're not creating global citizenship. You're not creating inclusion of the world and the globe in your country. You start to change those things, and you limit freedom of expression as well. You start to infringe on, people under 18's acts. I think that's really where it starts. I'll get to that in a second. But it's like, that's totally true. We have to address that. And it's a really difficult thing to have a unanimous perspective of. And it's a really difficult thing to legislate. And each time I go to Europe and I see new rules that make sense to me from a logical standpoint, they still frustrate me. Like, Ursula von der Leyen making me take my fingerprints when I arrive at the French border. Excuse me, like these are my fingerprints. That's an invasion of that's. But again, logically, that makes a lot of sense, right? You want to have a tracking system of who comes into your country and who doesn't. And so then it becomes like Big Brother on a number of ways, because right now it's Big Brother because we have social media that can be influencing from any perspective and can get into the minds of young people. You go to sleep and you're scrolling reels, you wake up and you're scrolling reels, you're bored during the day and we don't have time to just sit and think, we scroll reels. That is the life of a Gen Z right now. Talk to any young person and try to get them in a circumstance where they're not going to be virtue signaling the fact that they don't spend time on social media, and they will be spending most of their time, free time, looking at this type of content. And so in many ways right now the influence that's happening is very much Orwellian, but the other level of it is that if you try to legislate it, it also might be Orwellian, because you're imposing a federal or a governmental body's regulation around what you can and can't see and witness, which is something that has to be agreed upon amongst a society and not just legislators at the very top. And so what can you do about that? What is the solution to that? I think the answer is probably to make sure those under 18 are most protected and the people that are, I think, most vulnerable in our society get the opportunity to have infrastructure of protection. And you start there. You start at young people, specifically children, that are on social media are exposed to so much different content and forms of misinformation that if you do not have grounding and oversight of that, you risk having a population that by the time they're 18, barely, going into adulthood, have a whole variety of perceptions of the world. Now, I think by the time I'm a proper adult, in my hopefully by the time I'm in my 30s or 40s, we'll have legislation around this, and we'll have some merit around how we control that. But that's why I've been so vocal on the Online Harms Act, or around issues where we need to make sure there's infrastructure. As parents certainly can't do a good enough job of doing this. Andrew Scheer, the former leader of the Conservative Party and current House leader of the Conservative Party, told me in my delegation that it's the responsibility of parents to impose the regulation on their own children as to what they should be seeing or not seeing. It's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. You cannot trust parents that have no idea what their kids are seeing, that have no idea that your kid can get on any app anywhere and get loads of various content and information, and be totally manipulated to think or to act in a particular way from an outside source. That's not something that parents can govern. That's not something that you can control even with your own self-control. It's everywhere. And so the government has to create regulation, at least for people under 18, for that issue in particular.
And for those of your generation who perhaps, they agree with you, but they have no idea what to do. At your age, I was worried about the usual crap, right? A levels, etc. What's your advice to them?
Right. In Canada, we have these advocacy groups that are coming together and forming in participatory democratic settings, as I was describing. There needs to be a lot more of that. I don't think that there's many people that would be considered youth and Canadian listening to this show, but if they are, Young Politicians of Canada is an outlet that they can participate in, and go to Parliament Hill and meet with some of our elected officials to help them better understand the crisis and the need and the threat that needs to be responded to now. In the UK, I'm not totally sure what groups are already doing that, but I think there are a number of them. And so if you are a parent, if you are an advocate, if you are, a mom or a dad or a concerned older sibling or cousin, or you yourself are young and are concerned go and show up to some of these meetings, go and show up to some of these organizations gathering around these issues, or go meet with your elected official and ask them what they're doing in order to advance the issue and advance the solution. And if you don't get satisfied with that result, you need to go out and advocate, because if it's not you who's doing it, who's doing it?
And my final question is something I ask of nearly every interviewee. We've spoken a lot about the failures of democracy and about the required reforms, but there are those who wish to tear it down. They're dictators. They want to be aristocrats over here. What's your message to them?
To the dictators?
To the dictators and those who would want to be them.
Good luck, because with the amount of information and share of information at the rate that it's moving, the fact that I could have the conversation with the same perspective of a teenage girl in Saudi Arabia who has had access to the same social media as I have also comes with a lot of benefits, because we have the same ultimate perspective of freedom of expression and perspective, and the ability to express how we want to based on what we see the internet is able to do. That anyone that tries to, I think, pursue the amount of power that you're describing is going to have a lot of difficulty gathering so many different opinions in one and creating a rise up, unless they're able to speak to everyone that fits within the category of so many different backgrounds and opinions, and is able to be representative enough to pull people out. But I actually think what people think we're doing very poorly right now, in terms of social and developmental and perspective and people falling apart, well, I think we're actually thriving, and there's never been as many smart and critically minded and independent people as we have now. There's never been as much, well, we have a small demographic that are showing up to protest, that are showing up to, wreak havoc, that are affected by foreign manipulation and other unfortunate sources. We've also never had the amount of people that are as knowledgeable as they are now. And I certainly would not have a quarter, an eighth, a 32nd of the amount of knowledge that I have now if it wasn't because of the mediums that I have to access information of what's going on around the world. So if Putin thinks he's doing well right now, and anyone here listening thinks he's doing well right now, he's not. Only a third of his population, if even, and that's me being super liberal, supports the conflict. Young people there fucking hate him. Middle-aged people there are frustrated because they're now living in poverty thanks to his war. In China, I mean, we don't even have to get into the labor rights there. Like, the world wants to see more democratic leadership. So if you want to be a dictator, I wish you the best of luck. There are some great books. I mentioned Machiavelli. You're going to have an incredibly difficult time, and I think you're going to have a lot more fun, including multiple voices and having a system that works for everybody, becoming an elected official or reforming the systems of democracy that don't work properly, which are probably why you ultimately feel that way. And I also suggest to people like Vladimir Putin or Xi Jinping or Kim Jong-un, who knows better because he went to school in Switzerland and actually understands Western democracy, to
He's the holder of the
have a little bit of
Steam
empathy,
account
have a
in
little bit of
North Korea.
compassion.
There's one Steam account registered to North Korea, and the theory is that it's Kim Jong-un's.
Probably,
Yeah.
like he knows what's going on in the world. So have a little compassion, have a little empathy, check in on your neighbor, ask how they're doing once in a while. And I think we'll all get along a lot better that way. But I'm not afraid of this radicalization or mobilization creating dictatorship in young people. And also with the amount of information that is being spewed out, I think people's ability to lead and organize have becoming very minimal in terms of their ability to communicate with other people and form shared perspectives, which is also something we need to work on as a society. But I should probably leave it there before I go down that rabbit hole.
Jaden, thank you very much for coming on the show. It's been a really enlightening conversation.
It's a pleasure. I'm really excited to share this, and I hope that people listening can have a takeaway that means at least understanding maybe another perspective or lens on society, one who is juggling and experiencing growing up in a world of so much information that we have to figure out how to process it and what to do with it, and how to make institutions safer and better and more effective for those that it serves. So thank you all, and thank you, Theo.
Ladies and gentlemen, this has been Why We Fight. Thank you very much indeed. That's it for this episode of Dictators v Democrats, Why We Fight. What struck you most about their story? What surprised you? What did you disagree with? Feel free to let us know in the comments below and we can have a conversation. But if you enjoyed this work, if you made it to the end, then well, I hope that you did. Please do like, share and subscribe. With your help, we can grow this channel and we can get these voices out to more and more people. If you want to support my kind of work financially, then paid subscribers to Patreon or Substack get these episodes 1 week early. Again, that's on all podcast networks and on this YouTube channel. Thank you very much indeed for watching, and always remember, democracy is non-negotiable. Goodbye.